job. Obviously, the sticky note on the corner of my screen doesn't help.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's Third Thursday training. Today, I would like to help facilitate a discussion and highlight our local expertise as it relates to data-informed instruction and its impact upon programmatic performance. I have a few slides, but time is limited. I could use them as a framework, but I really would like to, again, facilitate this discussion rather than present on LACES specific, right, database specific topics. So I can go ahead and share slides, but perhaps Becky or Laura would like to begin addressing some of the previously discussed topics around reports and views.
I can certainly jump in, John. I do have to duck out a little bit early because I've got a group coming in that I have to facilitate a training for a little bit later. But, you know, one of the things that John and Laura and I had discussed before this training, and I actually saw a very good session during the COABE conference that we attended virtually last week that talked about the same issue, was that often use of data just starts with a question that somebody has, and I wonder, or I need to know kind of situation. And I found that that's true in our own program very often. And one of the things that I just thought I would share is something that LACES has developed just very recently that we've found to be very, very helpful in our own program. I know Laura says she's used it in her program. I believe Steph Rittberger from CLC of the Black Hills mentioned during our last LACES training that they had also used it. And it's a newer report called Student Points for Next EFL. And this comes up quite often in our site when teachers say to me, okay, I know this person is on the post-test list, but I'm not sure which test would be the best one to give to them at this point. And I'm actually going to share my screen and show you. I've got a scrubbed version here. It's the actual report, but I took off the student identifying information, and I also deleted some of the columns just so that it would be a little bit easier to see the pertinent information for how we've used this report very recently in our program. So you can see I've actually just got 3 students here, and this first student, who is student AB, just coincidentally, quite honestly, you can see took all three TABE pre-tests, reading, language, and total mathematics for their pre-test. And this report shows us the current level they're at in each of those areas, the next level they need to attain in order to make a measurable skills gain, and then the points needed on their scale score in order to obtain that measurable skills gain. So if somebody wanted to know, you know, what should student AB do for their post-test, a logical answer here might be, well, they only need 3 more points on their scale score to make a gain in reading. My next question would be, has this student studied reading? and if they have, in fact, that would be my recommendation. You can see something very similar with student TC, who's the second one here. Again, language, reading, and total mathematics. Now, language is one of those subject areas that we, you know, sometimes save for our instruction until a later date. We more often address mathematics and reading needs with our students up front. So here again, you might ask, you know, have they received instruction in language? Have they done some work in writing? Have they done some work in building those grammatical sentences, those kinds of things? And if so, that might be a logical test to take. The other 2, in my opinion, it's kind of a coin flip here. You know, you've got 22 points versus 24 points on reading and math. And again, where have they done the bulk of their study? And then the last one is one that doesn't give us much clarity, right? You've got 56 points needed for math, 35 for reading, and 22 for language. And again, you would look here to see where has the student done the majority of their study, but knowing that this one's a little bit more of a reach, and we might need to do a bit more instruction with this student, depending on how we feel they've been doing in class, before going ahead and giving that post-test and taking that chance on having to do a subsequent assessment after if they don't make that scale score gain. So those are some of the kinds of conversations that we've had around this particular report and some of these very specific data points that are available to us through our database. Sure, we're not the only ones who've used this report. Does anybody else have any input on this report or on any other similar kinds of data that you look at?
Becky, I would share, this is Laura over at LSS. I would share that we just started using that report, and it's something that Amy and I are sharing with our teaching team once a month. So monthly at our staff meetings, we're bringing forward this list where teachers can see the first and last name of their student, and they can identify how many points are needed for them to get to that next level. So it serves as an indicator for our ESL teachers as to how close someone really is, or far, from making that measurable skill gain on their post-test. And usually it's right in line, it feels like so far, right in line with what teachers already sense about their students. So it's affirmation. Where I see this as being most helpful is with students that are a little bit more on the quiet side in a class. Maybe culturally, they're not as vocal, or just because their personality is such that they're not as outspoken in the classroom setting. And that person, it can be really helpful reinforcement for the teacher that I thought they were doing well, but this shows me they're even stronger than I thought they were. So I think that's helpful. That kind of data is helpful in those cases.
I really love that you described it as an affirmation of what the teacher already feels, Laura, because I think so many times, you know, in the classroom, you do kind of have that sense of where a student's at. It's nice to have a piece of data to back that up as well.
Say, Becky, there was a question in the chat about how you run that report. Is that off the reports tab in the green and LACES for those data users?
It is off the reports tab. The specific name is student points for next EFL. So when you get that big long list of reports, it's just a checkbox next to student points for next EFL. And I believe you can put a date range in for the students, but it'll run on the student selection that you have up. And I believe that we covered that in our, not the last LACES training, but the one previous. So if the data management person can find that piece in the notes from our LACES training, they should be able to find that as well.
That'd be January's webinar archive. Very good. Yeah, so strategically utilizing those scale scores to determine which areas are, in the event, very close to a educational functioning level gain, measurable skill gain via a post-test, could hopefully guide you and maximize your time and efficiency with those students, especially in these last couple months. Affirmation. Yeah, I agree. Well said. Any comments or questions regarding this particular stratagem or tactic? So as we think about scale scores, Becky, Kim, Laura, others, we have our tape diagnostics and we have our other assessment information. How do we operationalize that? How do we make it actionable or meaningful in our day-to-day of contextualized learning and standards-based instruction and everything else? Thoughts?
Well, I can go into some of what we do with Best Plus scores, if this is a helpful next step. And I will just screen share. Oh, no, I can't. If you would.
Yeah, I couldn't either. Yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Did you accept the co-host?
I don't
I
see it.
think-
Oh, now I've got it. Thank you, Kim. So you should be seeing a Best Plus 2.0 summary report. Does this look familiar to everybody?
Yes.
I can't see heads nod because our cameras aren't showing to me. So with this, we do have some breakdown of information here with the pillars of listening comprehension, language complexity, and communication. But typically, our go-to is just to utilize that, score their SPL, and to note their NRS educational functioning level. Something that is useful, I think is really useful to crosswalk that score to, is this resource, which is available online and by reaching out to myself or John or your program coordinator or director will likely know where to find this. And here, these are some really nice descriptions for what our students can do in terms of listening and speaking, our basic reading and writing, and our functional workplace skills at each NRS level. And I have found this particularly useful in talking with stakeholders about what our students can do at each level of instruction. Sometimes our DLR local office staff find this helpful in their work with their clients, their shared participants, and employers at times get a better sense of what their employees are able to do at each level of proficiency. And if in your program you're looking for a starting point to work with a student that's at a certain level, or you have a multi-level group, this will help the instructor know what they can do, and if you look at the next level for that person, what they're aspiring to do. So what our instruction is building them up to, so that we can appropriately contextualize our instruction in a level appropriate way for that student. So this is, I think, a helpful tool that I've pulled out on several occasions that can help with grouping students. And this is just an image of what we do in our program with those scores to group students by level. And it's not very clean cut. It's a little bit of a patchwork quilt, so to speak. But we have scale scores, our NRS level, and these are our class divisions. So these test results are useful for grouping students accordingly. So most likely your program has its own methodology for leveraging that test data for grouping students. I'm going kind of quickly, but I'm sure those things are fairly familiar to you. But this is what I show our teachers on a quarterly basis. On a quarterly basis, I show with each NRS level this comparative data table. So we take our performance from the previous fiscal year, our current fiscal year. So this is our true data from second quarter. I show what our targets are, and that is in our assessment policy that's updated each year. We're able to find these statewide targets. And John is so kind as to share statewide aggregate data. So we're also able to see how we're supporting the statewide average with our quality of instruction and our post-test rate, so that we can demonstrate the learning gains of our students. So this is something we look at in usually small groups or pairs, and I invite teachers to see their own class in that data. I think there's always an opportunity to leverage those types of questions that Becky mentioned from the COAB session on what do I wonder, but our teachers do that in pairs and then ask me or Amy as their data specialist if they have questions, and leverage each other's expertise when they see, oh, you know, I really want to get closer to that 32%, or I want to get closer to that 30% with my advanced learners. What can we do to support those students? And maybe look at that table we saw earlier with student points to next EFL gain and see if there's any people that are really close to that finish line that might benefit from support with a volunteer or some targeted instruction to gain a few extra points. And finally, our table 4 is something that's called table 4 from LACES, and John may talk a little bit more about LACES. This is something that I also share with staff on a quarterly basis. I have, I gotta move that over a little bit. I have written in our measurable skill gain targets. So I usually do that very low tech trick so that we can see again how we're doing so far. This is data from our third quarter. And as we go through the year, I sometimes unpack some of these columns with our staff, taking a look at this column H, that shows how many students have separated the program before they received a measurable skill gain. Those are students that we're not going to likely get any data on unless they return to the program. But the next column, I, shows us how many students remain and have not yet made a measurable skill gain. And then I can unpack it a little further, noting we're aiming for 30% out of 25 enrollees. How many more students do we need to get to that level? So as we approach the end of the fiscal year, that helps me to talk with teachers and give a little context to, oh, sometimes it's just one more student that we need to achieve a measurable skill gain on their post-test in order to meet our goal for the year. So sometimes our groups are that small that it really is that 1 or 2 students that makes a difference, and the data helps put that in context.
And I think one of the beautiful parts about the NRS tables as they now appear in our reports is that we have the ability to click on those 1 or 2 students, on that number 1 or 2, and see actually who they are. So we can give you their names. Here are the students that have not yet made a gain. They're in your classes. You'll want to make sure to include them on your post-testing list as soon as they're eligible.
And I think it's very strategic that you're looking at your targets by EFL. I mean, the truth is the feds, we actually negotiate on an overall aggregate figure. I break them down into EFLs, but we could have different levels on those EFLs. And as long as we meet that overall MSG, it doesn't matter in which EFL we earned that, or your students earned that outcome. So, but as a local approach, being mindful and aware, terrific. Becky, in the interest of time, did you, I know you need to leave. Do you want to say anything about GED Ready or TABE?
Just love to hear how some of the teachers are using those GED Ready reports that you can tie to instructional materials when students are taking a GED Ready test and maybe getting a not likely to pass or a too close to call. I would love to hear from the teachers how they're operationalizing those reports that you can pull and how useful they're finding them in helping students to go back and fill in those gaps.
So you said GED Ready reports. I use them quite a bit in my class. My students take GED Ready tests often, and that's what I use to plan what I teach. And I found that what my students are missing really lines up with the high impact indicators. So generally, if I can follow the high impact indicators, I'm going to catch most of the students in my class. But then I will look at what they missed. If it's somebody who, if I have somebody who is likely to pass and then they don't pass when they take the test, I can look at what they did well on the Ready test and what they missed on the final and see, is this an issue of they just weren't ready? Is it an issue of I know they know how to do these things that they missed? Is it nerves? Is it need more practice with test taking skills or something like that? So I think it's helped me help some students who've been really close figure out what they need to do to get to passing.
Nikita, I really appreciate you sharing that. Specifically, your mention of the high impact indicators. I've just put a link in the chat. If you aren't familiar with high impact indicators, talk to your coordinator or director. Talk to me, talk to Becky, Kim, and let us help guide you. It was formerly known as most frequently missed items on the GED, but it really can help you maximize your time and a program of study with students.
I've also noticed some things on the high impact indicators that weren't covered very thoroughly in a lot of the GED printed material that's out there. And that's really changed what I'm teaching to some of my students or what things I'm needing to go out and find. Science is a good example. There's a lot of, many of the high impact indicators deal with experiments, and our printed material deals more with content or parts of the body, parts of the cell, those kinds of things, and not so much designing an experiment, fixing errors in an experiment.
Terrific example. Other thoughts, approaches? As you compose any questions or comments, I would note, I also put a couple other links in the chat. Going back to Laura's talk, I think the term she used was patchwork, right? She showed some in-house materials that they use, some views that they create, and she actually referenced the old NRS level descriptors. I still find value to them. However, you should know those have been superseded by the link in Appendix B. So that's in the NRS Technical Assistance Guide, the entire Appendix B. Before, it was a nice, clean chart, reading, numeracy, and workplace skills. Now it's much more convoluted and detailed and aligned with college and career readiness standards, and certainly denser, not an at a glance. But there again, we do cobble together various tools and views and spreadsheets and communication protocol or mechanisms, right, to affect these processes, the appropriate instruction, timely assessments, and reported outcomes.
Thank you for clarifying that, John. I indeed did not find it as user-friendly or shareable in the revision.
Anyone have any comments about the TABE diagnostic reports, right? The partial mastery, full mastery. Do you utilize those scores? And if so, how?
I'll hop in here and say, I took a
Please.
question not that long ago from a person who had a question about those TABE diagnostics and the TABE score reports. They asked me, this person had a plus next to their scale score. So that means they made a gain, right? But then next time I should move them one level up. And I said, you're partially right. It means that you should move them one level up the next time you test them. They need the next test level higher, but it does not automatically mean that they made a gain. It's just an indicator that they're at that top level of that score point. And if you test them on the same level, you'll probably get an out of range, because hopefully they've improved and they'll shoot off the top of that one. So I know sometimes those can be confusing. One of the things that we always tell our staff too is just, if you have a question like that, ask, because we want the question out there and we want the information to be out there so that everybody's sure what they're looking at and what they're doing.
Right. And we're not in the business of shaming anyone. I admit it's probably been a few hot minutes since I took the TABE online refresher, the 2-part series. But yeah, I would encourage you. I hope that we cultivate that sense where you feel like you can approach your coordinator, approach your colleagues, and when in doubt, approach me, because I would rather have that discussion, address it, and correct it, rather than you wait 6 months, a year, and it becomes, the situation exacerbates and it becomes truly problematic. And then potentially overshadows all the other good work you're doing because of this one misunderstanding. Go ahead.
Lynn just had a comment, John, in the chat. She said, we utilize the scores most often for advanced trade or when they're applying for college.
Real good. I like to look to at that TABE domains, I believe it's called. And I could share my screen, but it takes all 3 subtests and shows which particular aspects of reading, math, or language are tested on which forms. And that's a good reminder to instructionally to remember as you're looking at maybe increasing that level for the post-test. Is there content that's going to be tested that we haven't addressed and that wasn't addressed on that pre-test? And so you don't want to necessarily set that student up for gaps, but I can certainly put that link in there as well. In the interest of time, I know we have just 15 minutes left. I don't know if we should go ahead and pivot to approaching data related inquiries and the generation of data questions.
Well, John, we could speak to some instructional applications too, whenever you feel like it's appropriate.
Yeah, please, go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna find the link to the domain scores and you take the lead on the instructional topics here. And Amy.
Hi, everybody. I'll sit at this computer for a little bit. So I was just going to very briefly talk about what we have recently and do regularly do at our program to utilize, for example, Table 4, which I will show you. Okay. I'm just going to quick share my screen here. Okay, so we noticed at our recent quarterly Teachers in Service that, okay, what are we looking at here? There are a lot of numbers. I am looking at, okay, so we noticed, excuse me, these numbers are very small, ESL level 4 and 5. If we will follow those all the way over here, you'll see these. Is it okay if I write on this slide? Sure. Okay. Okay. So these are our completion rates right now, 13.6 and 10.7 for ESL levels 4 and 5 respectively, and our goals are 33 and 30. So these are quite low. They're slightly lower than, slightly higher than they were maybe a month or two ago, but they're still lower than we would like. So then, since these ESL levels roughly line up with what we call Oral 3 at our program, we got the Oral 3 teachers together. There are 3 of us, and we discussed, okay, what's happening there? Why is that happening? We did notice also that the state average for those levels are also lower for whatever reason. So it isn't just us. However, what can we do as a program to work on that? What might be the reason for it, or or what can we do to bring those numbers up a little bit? So yeah, so as a group, we as a team, we kind of talked together and thought, okay, maybe we need to just take a moment and pause and focus more on some particular skills that can help with the Best Plus tests. And I will also use just quickly the score report that Laura showed. This is something that you can use the Best Plus score report for, but it's not totally necessary. But once in a while, it can come in handy. Okay, so for example, this is if I look at the sub-scores, the subscale scores, language complexity, this student got 0.81 was her average, and the SPL average was 1.15. That's significantly higher, really. So that means that this student is making significantly less complex sentences when she answers than the average student who gets an SPL 5 on the test. And normally they aren't, that far different, 2.43 and 2.33. Okay, that's not that much different, but these two, that is significant. That's quite a big difference. So that would show me that this student could probably benefit from somehow encouraging complexity in her sentences, whether it's, teaching the use of adverbial clauses or clauses of time, like in the morning, in the afternoon, every week, whatever, or things like because, or, if, when, right? Making sure that we do a little bit more focusing on that in our classrooms. Yeah, of course, it can take a lot of forms. We certainly don't teach to the test. However, the nice thing about Best Plus is you hardly can teach to the test because such a wide variety of questions and things that happen in the test. But we would work on things like that. And so in that case, the testers and the teachers can get maybe a little bit different perspective on things. If the tester happens to notice, okay, on table 4, right, these are the 4 people in this level who still need to gain whatever, the tester can say, you know, I noticed that these students really don't use much complexity when they're taking the test, blah, blah, blah. The teacher may not have noticed that as much in class because you're doing 2 kind of different things, right? So that can kind of help. And then we as a team are starting to focus more on, okay, let's make sure we kind of focus on these things that can increase complexity in the class. Or it can be even simple things sometimes like the phrase, what about you? Best Plus uses that phrase all the time. And that's not teaching to the test because everybody says, what about you? That's just a general conversation. But the students don't know it.
Nobody says, what about you?
You don't think so? Seriously? Oh,
I say it all the time.
I say it. I say it, but maybe that's because I'm a
Yeah.
plus test administrator. I don't know. And I've adopted it. Okay, Heather also says she says it. So at least 2 of us over here, whatever. Anyway, how about you? What about you? It's the same. So even just a small thing like that. So who knows, you know, depending on the level, that can make a big difference as well.
I think that's terrific, Amy. I mean, that's very specific, targeted, but in the grand scheme of things, you know, right there, that exchange you had with Kim, you know, we all have our own vernaculars. What about you? How about you? And you? I mean, their intonation, I could see it if you're doing close exercises and building, you know, sort of that closed frame, and you could reinforce certain language complexities or collocations. And I could see TSTM stepping in here and maybe informing some of that, those types of approaches, and how we can take our existing material and modify it slightly to help elevate or achieve those ends in a real world situation. And all the different ways people try to elicit a response from someone else in a dialogue.
Right.
Lynn made another comment in the chat, John. She said the scores also help our students understand where they're at and what they need to work on. Students also gain more confidence when they see the scores going up. And I know this is something that we talk about in our own program and that I mentioned in AEIDP when we do that training, that we're looking for the number, right? We know where that cut point is. We know how many points they need for the next EFL. So that student might raise their score 22 points. And if they needed 24, our reaction is a little bit of, that's not what the student needs, right? The student knows they made a significant gain. They made a huge improvement. Their skills are more than they were before. So, you know, helping the students to gain that confidence by showing them those scores and saying, look what you did. Look at the difference between these skills on your pre-test and on your post-test. You're so much, you know, so much more now than you did when we started. Imagine what you'll know the next time we take another test.
Here, Becky.
Great point, Lynn.
Here, Becky, Lynn, because yeah, we talk a lot, right? We're in the NRS and TABE and all of it, but in the grand scheme of things, in the higher purpose, right? We're helping that student progress. And I too, admittedly, get lost in EFLs and don't focus enough on scale score gain. And you know, you've all told me repeatedly, right, that NRS level 4 covers 3 grade level equivalencies. I mean, that is just huge, so much content. So yeah, I don't think I don't celebrate enough those scale score, not norm based, but what's that term I'm looking for? Self-criterion of progress. Excellent.
So I do have something I can share with the group, and I did pull it up, so I will share it. From a programmatic perspective, and I think this sometimes helps us when we're looking at how our programs should evolve and develop. There we go. That historical data is really important, and you get tired of trying to extrapolate that from LACES. So I have literally created a spreadsheet with multiple worksheets in it, breaking down all kinds of data. And I have it back, let's see, almost 10 years now that I go back and look at stuff. And I make notes at the bottom of each year, like, oh, this is the year that we closed in March because of COVID, that kind of thing. So I can remember 10 years from now what's going on. But one of the things we do is things like this, where we're looking at like our program totals and our retention rates, and then I can compare it with some statewide averages, things like that. I also track what the state is doing with stuff. And I do that with things like post-test rates and dashboard comparisons on certain statistical data. It just seems like a really clean way for me in particular, because then I'm not trying to come up with a query that meets all the expectations of LACES. Well, I'm not asking Becky to come up with a query. I just have this information. It really makes a difference when it goes to writing grants or to discussing with a staff person maybe why we need to change and maybe look at something differently, because maybe the data historically is showing something different. It's like, okay, but over time, look what's been happening. And so I don't, that's just a suggestion on my part. Anytime you can create a place to keep historical data, I think it's super important. Becky also keeps tons of historical data in a folder that every one of our staff people has access to on our drive. And it's very well organized.
Terrific example, Kim, of longitudinal considerations, whether you're an administrator or teacher wanting to consider your own classes progress and teacher accountability, a lot of different ways to utilize that. Kim, I know Becky, do you have a minute or two? Do you want to address, maybe some approaches of how we can help teachers, we as a program, as a statewide body of colleagues, help each other identify what questions we need to ask, how to help our instructors, how to help you know what exists, and so you can frame questions, data related questions and performance related questions.
No, what I like our teachers to do is be really curious about the information that we're putting into LACES, right? You all are the keepers of the information as it's coming into our programs. You're often the ones doing the intakes. You're definitely the ones having those conversations with students about progress and helping them with post-testing and looking at those results and planning lessons as a result. But then, we do run reports at Cornerstones once a month, and we run extensive reports on a monthly basis. And those reports are all shared, as Kim said, with every staff member. So, fostering just that sense of curiosity when you look at some of those numbers and you think, well, why is that like that? I mean, that's a lot of times how I start analyzing our data. I'll look at something and think, well, why is that like that? That's weird. And then it will just lead to more questions. How did it get that way? What else could be affecting it?
Maybe it was just a keystroke.
Maybe it was a stroke, and that's the other thing. Teachers are the best cross checks of the data management people that you can ever have. If you see something that looks strange, it might be because my fingers were not right that day and I messed something up. But I also think that, if you do have any questions about your own class, your own students, don't hesitate to ask the person who's doing your data entry and pulling those reports out of LACES what they can tell you about that. And you don't have to necessarily articulate, can you run a report that includes this and this and this and this and this? A lot of times it's just, can you do this, and asking the question that lets that data management person go and start to explore the database and to see exactly what we can pull out and in what form.
I had yesterday I had a meeting with somebody from the Department of Education, and a whole group of people came in, and I asked Becky ahead of time, like, how many 16, 17-year-olds do we have? Because I know this is going to be a talk. And we pulled that out, and I said, wait a minute, you can you can go to school up till the age, and I think we pulled through 21. Is that what
Pulled
we
through 21, yeah.
And I said, well, how many 18 to 21-year-olds do we have? And it blew my mind how many 18 to 21-year-olds. We've never had that kind of data. So that really brought some interesting discussions, because it was just, I was asking a question about something else. I'm like, but why?
Why are we
Well-
skewing so young right now? And we really are skewing very young. Yeah.
I would just draw your attention. We've briefly and quickly addressed a number of these things. As Becky talked about LACES reports and others, I would just note that the state leadership funds pay, well, state leadership and admin funds pay for our LACES database. And that includes hosting fees. And with those hosting fees, essentially your local database, in addition to the overall my database, as it were, that cost or that payment includes technical assistance. So, we're paying for it. Don't hesitate. Of course, follow your local protocol, but don't hesitate. You can always, I would appreciate it if you carbon copy me. If you like, hey, I'm not sure how to run this report. You can contact me. And if I don't, I end up contacting LACES. So sometimes you might just want to carbon copy me and go through that. I guess it's really your preference, but I just note that because I don't want you to feel like you're bothering LACES. We pay for that service. Oops, let me go back here. This second slide, did it advance for you? No. Areas for consideration. I think we need to be talking forthcoming about student persistence, intensity, and duration. We've been talking about post-test rates, but the PD team pushed back and challenged me. And as I looked more closely at the data, we do have some issues, and I'll just briefly address those in the next slide. But as a reminder, we're talking about performance. Think about getting those GED subtests entered. And I know that in itself is a process, but you are responsible for that data matching. I can assist, Barb can assist, but if you don't get that LACES subtest score keyed, it won't count. And so we don't want to leave low-hanging fruit, terrific credential outcomes off the, leave it on the table. Get those SSN so I can help your employment matches. For the National Student Clearinghouse, as it relates to post-secondary, for your information, I need first name, middle initial, last name, and date of birth. If they don't have middle initial, it's a fuzzy match, but those are the fields that I submit for that. And then, of course, all of these are negotiated with the feds, and those, as Laura mentioned earlier, are noted within your assessment policy. But if we fail, I don't want to be the one WIOA partner that fails to meet its negotiated performance. So just because I know the high quality instruction exists. Here are some considerations on which you can ruminate. This is for this current year's data, right? Probably 3/4 of the way through it. I pulled it today, but we have 2,322 enrollments, right? Of those, almost 20% have been assessed twice. Of this 2,322, almost 14% of them don't have any hours whatsoever at this point of the year, right? Over 44% have fewer than 12 hours, right? Over 44% of our enrollments at this point, let me repeat, won't meet that participant threshold, right? We have fewer than 12 hours. And then
They could, John, they could. It depends on when they were enrolled.
True, but in terms of fiscal year hours, no, that's true. But in terms of fiscal year hours this year, no, but and we do get that crossover, but still, as you look at this year's data, over 44% don't have 12 hours. And you're right. I mean, that's really getting into the minutia. Some of them might be reportables. But the fact of the matter is then 73% of our students have fewer than 40 hours. And, with the new TABE, we don't have that many adult secondary ed students anymore. Currently, our post-testing rate is 32.7. And so again, things to consider, right? Persistence. Go ahead.
When I was looking at that data, one of the first things that popped in my head is, other than if they were rolled over into the new year, how in the world can you have somebody with 0 hours? Because you had to do an intake and you had to do an assessment. So people are missing
Yeah,
out.
no, and I just followed up, some of it too, and I don't want to get in the weeds. We'll address it at the closeout webinar, but some of it's with your duplication of end of year classes and when you're pushing forward. If that student goes into a class, right, within LACES, that's essentially considered a reportable because you have them enrolled. Anyway, lots to consider. I really liked all of the input. Thank you, Nikita, Kim, Becky, Lynn, others for sharing your perspective and entertaining this rather multifaceted topic. Some last comments, questions, or thoughts?
I know that Becky and I love data, and Laura does too. So if you have questions and stuff you want to ask us about, we're more than willing to have discussions with you about that. Times like, why is something happening? We might not know, but we can help you maybe ask some questions so you can go back and look at your own data. Any other questions for the good of the group today? Comments?
Well, I want to thank Amy for sharing from an instructional and a Best Plus Test Administrator's perspective how testing and instruction meet and how and sharing about how as teams, teachers can work together to make decisions about how to enhance instruction.
Here. And I didn't mean to inadvertently omit Amy. Yeah, everyone's contributions, much appreciated. And I hope this gives us some momentum to consider performance for the remainder of this program year and into this new grant cycle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good
Have a
evening.
good day.
Bye now.
Thank you.